So yesterday I made a video on the whole entire situation with Logan Paul and one of his former co-hosts, George Janko. If you want like more context to the initial things that were said on George Janko's podcast, I recommend going and watching that first. But just a little recap. George, who was one of the co-hosts on Logan Paul's podcast, Impulsive, he recently had the other co-host who's still on the show, Mike, on just a couple days ago. But I think by the time this video comes out, it's like 3-4 days by the time that, that was initially posted. And in that podcast, in that episode of the podcast, they talked about why George left the show. And he pretty much, almost exposed Logan Paul for being a bad person and a lot of the things that happened during this and the reasons why George left. And to be honest, when I first saw all this, I was very much on George's side. But just today, Logan Paul has actually responded to majority, if not all, the things that were said against him. And we're going to go through all of it bit by bit because, to be honest, Logan's kind of pulled out a decent amount of receipts.
I had to start my own show because we're not making money on this show and I'm getting pushed out.
You made money on the show.
I can show you my books. I was spending 10 G's a month being on the show.
All right, let's talk about this. Obviously, I wasn't on the podcast to represent myself, so I'd like to clarify a few things that were said. As well as having his own credit card, all expenses related to the show were paid for, including all travel and lodging. Obviously, George's total reimbursement came out to $20,000, 317 cents. I'd love to see any books that show otherwise. Spending $120,000 a year to be on a show is a little confusing.
This is a guy who's sending us screenshots of $11 million a week that he's making.
This statement is so crazy that it's almost laughable. That would mean I'm making $572 million a year. I'm nowhere near that. What happened was Prime had a very successful month. I think we did like 60 to 70 million, and I sent it to our group chat because I was proud of the business. I was stoked to show the boys, and I think George maybe misinterpreted that as my personal income.
The show hit rock bottom, and we weren't getting paid. I was getting paid $5,000 a month.
But you did make a sizable amount of money on the show.
And by the way, always grateful. I was always grateful.
Like that?
Yeah, I don't like to talk about money.
I know he doesn't want to talk money. I know he believed it out, but George made $317,000 in the 15 months that he got paid for on Impulsive. The work requirements consisted of about 3 days a month, 3 hours each day, traveling the world, networking, and meeting some of the coolest people ever. It comes out to about $2,300 per hour, and he also had 10% equity of the entire show.
Okay, so those first minute and 15, I'm going to go through bit by bit because it is like a 4-minute video and I want to get through every single thing. So the first thing that Logan mentions, but we're going to talk about George's pay before we talk about Logan's pay. So we're just going to take that first little section and the third section before we get into the middle bit of it. Is Logan pretty much comes out with the receipts talking about how, because in the episode with Mike, George talked about how, one, he was barely making any money, and two, he was actually spending an exceptional amount of money per week, every single time that he had to be on that show for travels and all that. And to be honest, I was kind of baffled by that as well when I heard George say that, talking about how, I had to spend all this money. To me, it's just a usual job would actually reimburse you with all that kind of stuff. And it's good to see that Logan's pulled out some receipts to show that that stuff was actually reimbursed. And then on top of that, he pulls out George's how much this man was paid in 15 months. He was paid 300 grand. Now, if at the start you weren't making any money, I can understand why you would be annoyed at that. 5G a month, that's fuck all. That, especially if you're living on your own, you have to pay rent and all that kind of stuff. $5 grand a month, especially in this day and age, this in 2024 or even in 2020 or before 2019 or whenever the Impulsive podcast started, is that that's not that much money. Five grand a month, that's really fuck all. But in the hindsight, he made a decent amount of money. In 15 months, making over 300K, barely any people struggle these days just to make over $100,000, let alone $300,000. So the fact that George kind of tiptoed around that a little bit was a bit suspicious to me as well. And I can also kind of understand, even Logan says it about how Logan was bragging about how much Prime was making, and I could see why George would take that a little bit wrong, especially if it's around the time when they were kind of not getting along so much. And as much as 300 grand is a decent amount of money, compared to how much Logan is making, I mean, I could kind of see why George would be, a little bit upset about that, because, Logan makes a fuck ton of money compared to them two, so I could kind of see where he would get at of why he would be a little bit annoyed. But even then, I'm just kind of you still got paid a decent amount of money.
Not you, not Caleb, not Kevin, not Dylan. Nobody fucking called me when I got fired.
George did not get fired. He quit. I'll touch on that in a second. But after he quit, I called him frequently. I reached out. I wanted to reconcile the friendship. I invited him to my birthday party and WrestleMania and even my ranch a few weeks later. He chose not to come. He also unfollowed all the people he mentioned on Instagram, which is maybe why they didn't call him. I don't know. I can't speak for them, but he still does not follow them to this day.
And then on my birthday, you guys shot 3 episodes, so I couldn't show up.
The 2 episodes he's talking about, not 3, were shot 4 days after George's birthday. His birthday's on January 3rd. We shot those episodes on January 7th. We were already in Vegas signing the UFC to Prime, and as we do, want to capitalize on the location and our use of time and energy and the guests in that city. George didn't come to work because he wanted to spend time with his family for his belated birthday, which I totally understand and we even praised.
One of the things that I love about George, he prioritizes his family and friends over anything.
So first off, even though like George did say in the episode as well about him getting fired, I kind of like, I didn't really believe that anyways. I kind of saw it as him quitting, which to be honest, you know, with a lot of the things that were going on, and there's a lot of things that, you know, I don't necessarily blame George for, and even Logan apologizes at the end of this video, but we're going to get like into that later on. That part I can 100% see, but it's good to see that Logan actually did reach out. Like George did mention about all these other people who didn't reach out, and to be honest, like, a lot of the other people, I don't really see why they would reach out, like, to him necessarily. Like, they might have been close with George, but it's good to see that at least Logan reached out. And even, like, the thing when it came to his whole entire birthday, I kind of understand Logan when it comes to that. And I feel like that's kind of a middle ground, and more George is just, like, you know, more or less annoyed at it, but he shouldn't really be annoyed at that, because, like, he made that decision to go ahead and, you know, take his time, and instead of, like, you know, doing the episodes and going to Vegas during his birthday, he wanted to spend it with family, which is absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that. Go ahead and spend it with your family. But if, like, during that time when you've chosen to go away, which once again, nothing wrong with that, it's absolutely fine. You can't blame someone for, if they're in Vegas, to go ahead and film some episodes, to, like, take advantage of the spot that they're at. Of course they're going to go ahead and do that.
I got my show going, and then not only was I controlled and pushed around on Impulsive, but then Logan's making calls and directing my show. He told me that I couldn't take Celsius.
So this is the big one. Making calls, trying to make it seem like I wanted to control his show is absolutely ridiculous. As you can see right here, I was like, hey, we got to get you Prime, because I saw him drinking our competitor, and he told me to call him. He was filming my reaction to tell me he took a deal with a competitor. I told him, please don't film. Like, I'd like to talk about this. I hope you're joking, by the way. The truth is, I thought it was a bad look that my best friend and co-host took a brand deal with our competitor without consulting me, asking me, giving us even a chance to match it before he signed the deal, because the audience that he's building, at least at the time, on his own podcast was being funneled directly from the podcast that I was building with him. I said, hey dude, I understand you need to make money. The entire text is right here that I sent him after our conversation, because I did understand his position if he needed to make money, but I thought it was also a little odd because he did make $317,000 in 15 months. Regardless, I did tell him I can't have him on Impulsive if he's going to take the deal with the competitor, but if after he makes the money he wants to come back to the podcast, he's more than welcome.
Now, with this whole entire, like, Celsius deal, I touched on this a lot in my video, and I was very, like, pissed off at Logan Paul for not wanting to match the deal or actually do anything about this. But I mean, it's really hard to say if this is actually true or not, whether, like, you know, George did reach out to Logan, and, you know, whether George kind of signed the deal before reaching out, or he reached out first and then Logan just kind of like ignored him or brushed it off. And I kind of understand like why Logan would say to him, hey, you can't be on my show. You know, if you're having a competitor, you know, sponsor your show. I mean, it's hard to really say. I personally wouldn't be too annoyed with it, but I can kind of understand it from like a business side of things. And even then, like if my best friend was like being sponsored by my competitor and like went ahead and signed that deal instead of consulting with me, I would understand why I would be Logan and be like extremely annoyed with that as well. But it's kind of hard to like really, you know, grasp the timeline of everything. But at the same time, I feel like Logan just mentioning George's pay a second time, it's like, we understand, we've already talked about that. I feel like he's just constantly bringing that up for no reason as well.
Hey man, where you're at, there's no room for you to grow. They won't let you grow. They will not let you grow.
I thought saying that to Mike was a little crazy. He's grown a lot. He has 2.7 million subscribers since we met. He's a multimillionaire, a best-selling author. I tried as much as I could to help him get into those positions, and it's not entirely because of me. Mike is a phenom in his own right, and he capitalized on the platform that I gave him, which is awesome. Just like George is doing now. But if that's not growth, like what is? In fact, I think people forget, like I praised George for starting a podcast like a lot.
Georgie started his own podcast. I think it's a great idea. I always love when my co-hosts venture out and do their own things. Congratulations. It's awesome, guys. Check out his podcast.
And also saying they won't let you grow was a little hurtful, because I thought at least I helped Mike do some of the things that he did, and I even encouraged him to start his own podcast.
I think you should take a page out of Georgie's book and start a show of your own.
There's no greater feeling than watching people you love succeed. I tried to give people around me a platform, and if they capitalize on it, fantastic. Mike and George did. And George will even tell you this off camera. I encouraged him to pursue media and comedy since 2015. I really believe in the kid, and I still do.
This one was a big one as well, is like, pretty much George saying that, him being on Impulsive, it felt like, he was kind of being closeted, and more or less that Logan wasn't really helping him like succeed even more than he wanted to be. And it's almost like, yeah, pretty much that like it was kept in a shell, and that if he stayed on Impulsive, his entire career wouldn't have helped to grow. And he uses Mike as a great example of like, he did give Mike this platform, and he was able to help Mike, and Mike's actually doing extremely well, which I mean, I have to agree with that on Logan. I even like disagreed with that in myself. I don't really think I talked about that too much in my last video, about how like, hey, you got to be great. I did. I said about George, I'm like, you got to be grateful when it comes to the people that give you these opportunities. And I definitely feel like, George is somewhat grateful, but not as, over that grateful. But at the same time, one thing that I feel like Logan didn't mention is that even though I can understand where Logan's just like, hey, he said it about Mike, like, hey, I gave Mike this platform, but he's done it on his own. I feel like that's very much a PR thing. I don't know what it is about Logan, but I still see him as having this massive fucking head on himself and thinking that like, hey, I made you guys. Like, to me, I still think that behind closed doors, Logan is definitely still that dude where he's just like, hey, I made you who you are. Be fucking grateful. I can 100% still seeing Logan be that type of dude. Even though he's like making it out like he's not, I still feel like he kind of is.
There's a lot more. I'm not going to get into it, but this isn't to say, by the way, that I didn't fuck up along the way. I did. I should not have mocked his beliefs. I apologize for that. I should have stuck up for him with Bobby Lee, and I definitely should have had his back more like a friend. There's a lot of things I would have done differently, but here we are. It saddens me that our story has unfolded this way. I wish him nothing but health, wealth, happiness, all the success that he wants, and I hope that one day we can sit down and have a relationship and a conversation.
So obviously, and that's just a little snippet to end that whole entire video. So that went for like 4.5 minutes, 4 minutes 20. If you want to go watch it without like me cutting it and all that stuff, obviously go watch it yourself and get your own opinions on it. When it comes to that little end there, right there, I think it's good that Logan does take responsibility. It is definitely such a PR thing to do, but it's still good to see him take it like publicly. I mean, I feel like that was pretty low of Logan anyways. The fact that he kept on egging on Bobby Lee throughout that entire podcast. Like, I've watched snippets on that podcast. I can't watch it like thoroughly because to me it's extremely awkward. Like, I get secondhand embarrassment a lot of the times. Like, I cringe really fucking easily when I see shit like that. So to me, like, watching snippets of that made me cringe exceptionally. And mocking someone else's belief, like, I'm not a very religious person. Like, I'd like to hope that there's something there, like, in my afterlife. But even when I was younger, I feel like when I was younger, I was definitely much more towards, like, atheism and didn't believe there was a God. But even then, like, I never really cared about what other people think. Like, if someone wants to believe in God and Jesus, or they have, like, any other religions, whether it's, like, Muslim or Judaism or Buddhism, whatever, Hinduism, whatever it is, like, I don't mock anyone for that. And I feel like if someone wants to go ahead and believe in something, they can. If someone wants to fucking think that, the Mandalorians are real and they want to worship Mandalorians, go ahead and do that. I honestly could not care less. Now, I also saw this tweet going around from George Janko. I don't know if this is real because it's not on his Twitter page right now. So I think he might have deleted this, but he talked about how he added Logan Paul and saying that, hey, no need to make TikToks. Come talk to me in person. We can handle it like real men. And I really hope that Logan and George actually get on a podcast together, whether it's on the Impulsive or whether it's on George's podcast. I would really like to see them two actually get on the podcast and talk about things. I feel like that there might be holes in both of their stories. I even said it in my video yesterday. I mean, I'm still very surprised that Logan came out with all these receipts. Like, yesterday, I mentioned that, hey, I feel like whatever Logan says, I can't really like be on his side. To be honest, I'm maybe leaning more towards Logan's side at this point. Very surprisingly. I mean, he's been on his shit lately. I remember when that dude tried to supposedly, like, expose Prime, and Logan made, like, these 2 videos completely, like, fact-checking that dude and shutting him down of all these, like, accusations that he was saying against Prime. So Logan's been on his shit recently, 100%. But I feel like there might be holes in both of their stories. Like, can we believe some of the text messages that Logan says? I mean, I'd like to hope that they are real, but in this day and age, it's really hard to believe if they are faked or not. I'm not saying they are. I'm not like coming out and saying like they are 100% fake. I'm just saying that there could be a possibility. I'd like to think that they're not, and I like to think that everything that is there is real. But I would really like to see George and Logan get on a podcast together, sit down and really talk it out, because I feel like they both still like don't like each other. Obviously, Logan's this response is very much like it's been like 3 days of the moment of me making this video since the initial podcast came out with Mike. And I feel like Mike maybe would have talked to Logan about some of the things that George mentioned in the podcast before it came out as well. So Logan's definitely had a couple days to sit down, think about it, and like write up a script with his PR team, obviously, because he definitely has a PR team with someone as big as him. And it's definitely much more of a professional response, where George was definitely going off more of emotions. You know, podcasts aren't really a scripted thing. They obviously have segments and they have like, you know, questions that they're going to ask their guests or whatever it is. But a lot of the times podcast is more or less just like, you know, touch and go. And there's not really a script to it. So I feel like a lot of the things that George was saying would have probably been off emotions, and maybe he did get some of the information wrong. I still think that they're both in the wrong here. I mean, even Logan mentions it at the end where he says that he wasn't the best friend and the best person in the world, and he's definitely not, you know, just completely free of any harm whatsoever from this whole entire situation. So I can 100% see like Logan definitely taking some responsibility, which is good, but I feel like they're both in the wrong here. It's just seeing of like if someone else it was in the wrong more when it came to this whole entire situation than the other person. But it's very hard. Like, you know, Logan did pull out some receipts and George was just going off mouth of word. So it's really hard to see like who actually is more in the wrong when it comes to this whole situation. I definitely feel like it was foul play on both sides, but I really want to see like the response. I really want them to sit down and actually talk things out and talk about what really happened. I'm not saying that George should go back to the Impulsive podcast. I feel like even if they made up, that George would just keep doing his own thing regardless. But I really want to see them sit down, talk it out, and actually get the facts straight, because I feel like there are still a lot of holes in these stories. I feel like even some of the things that Logan pulled out, I feel like might have still been out of context, and even then might not have 100% been true. So I feel like there's holes in both of the stories that they've told, and I'd really like to see them sit down and talk about this. But I want to hear what you guys have to think about this down below. I find this very interesting, and yeah, I really want this to keep progressing. But that's it from me. Peace out.